Hi friends, today I'm going to be showing you one of my all-time favorite sewing techniques, and that is how to create a beautiful hand-stitched buttonhole. I fell in love with this technique about a year and a half ago, and since then I've grown obsessed with trying to get my buttonholes neater and neater and neater. And needless to say, I do not use my domestic machine anymore to create buttonholes because I just love stitching them by hand. Hopefully after you watch this video, you might too. Anyway, if you would like to jump straight into it, you can skip to this timestamp here, but otherwise I'm going to take one quick second to discuss why I think hand-stitched buttonholes are wonderful, but also preferential, and possibly superior to domestic machine buttonholes. Just one girl's opinion. So why hand stitch a buttonhole? Firstly, there's nothing wrong with using a domestic machine to create a buttonhole. They do a really good job most of the time. It's quick, it's effective, they look great. If it works for you, that's awesome. But if you're anything like me, you may have had some turbulent times trying to get a really consistently wonderful buttonhole from a domestic machine. Sometimes they just struggle with the zigzag stitch or the calibration of the size of the buttonhole. Sometimes they just don't like the fabric that you're using, whether it be a little bit bulky or something like a denim or a corduroy. And ultimately, when you're adding buttonholes to your garment, it's probably one of the final steps of garment creation. So it's just really sad if you have any mishaps going on at one of the final steps of making your thing. So for me personally, I love having the extra control to make my buttonholes all look beautiful. I love that I can see that they're all exactly even and I don't have any weird problems with spacing, which often I do when I use a domestic machine. That's on me, but whatever, it's real. So yeah, I just feel a little bit empowered by having that extra control to make sure that my garment comes out beautifully. Sure, it takes more time, but I also think hand-stitched buttonholes are superior in quality to a domestic machine stitched buttonhole. Let me show you. I'll insert some clips here of a shirt that I made that has some buttonholes sewn by a domestic machine, and they look great, but something that I don't really like is that you have to open up the seam as one of the final steps, so there is a little bit of excessive fraying on the inside edge of the buttonhole. Of course, I could add some fray stopper to sort of mitigate that issue, but I really love with a hand-stitched buttonhole how you open up the seam as one of the first steps. So all of the stitches go on the outside edge of that opening, which means that all of the raw edges are completely cased. It's really nice and clean looking, and I feel like it just has more longevity and a higher quality because it's not going to be fraying over time. You feel me? The other thing I also love about them is that they look like they're made by a human. Now, some master tailors make them look so impeccable. I'm not there yet. They definitely look human-made, but I think that is completely special. The world is moving at an amazingly fast pace, and I do think that we tend to prioritize efficiency and optimization of time over potentially using a slower process to create a higher quality. So I think it is not only a little bit defiant, but also a luxury to have high quality, slow stitched details in your clothing. It's like, yeah, I could have done this faster, but I wanted to do it better. And for me, sometimes it's like, I just want you to know that a human made this. As simple as that. Like for example, I made this linen shirt for my husband Elijah, and it's almost completely hand stitched. And I think it's really special because the closer you look to this shirt, you will see imperfections in all of the stitching, and you will be able to appreciate that this is made by hands. It fills my heart, it's very special, it's a little bit countercultural, and I think it just has a story. Inherently it has story and meaning because it is just so purposefully handcrafted. So whenever I get the chance to choose between using a machine to do something or using my hands to do something, if I have the time and the energy, I'm going to choose to do it with my hands and do a slower approach because I just think it is so exciting to me personally.
The war against the machines.
It's awesome. Okay, let's do this. Anyway, those are just some of the reasons why I love hand-stitched buttonholes, but that's enough talking for now because I think it is truly time to get into how to create them. Wait, the last amazing thing that I failed to mention is that you can actually just do a buttonhole without a machine. If you don't even have a domestic machine, you could stitch everything in your garment by hand, including the buttonhole. To create your buttonhole, you're going to need a few very common sewing tools. The first thing I recommend is an awesome little ruler set just like this. The only thing you actually need is a small ruler. but I love using this tool here to evenly space out the buttonholes. Sometimes I like to use phrase stopper. You'll need some sort of tool to open up the buttonholes with. This is my tool of choice. Apologies, I don't know what it's called, but this is what it looks like. I also really like using my embroidery snips to further open up the buttonhole. Some needle and thread. I like to use rassand thread. It's a really nice high quality thread. You'll need a very precise marker that either erases using heat, air, or water. And I would highly recommend some sort of thimble to protect your hand while sewing. Just really quickly, when it comes to opening up the seam, I would highly recommend not using a seam ripper for this part of the process, just because you might accidentally rip through the fabric like I did here and have to do some really hodgepodge sewing to fix it. So yeah, ideally you'll pick a tool that you have a nice amount of control over so your buttonholes become beautiful and not frightening. The seam ripper is kind of like this. Okay, I've got 2 layers of muslin here and it is officially time to begin. I'll be using a contrasting thread, so hopefully you can see everything nice and clearly. Of course, the first step of creating your buttonhole is getting your button so that you can measure out how big the buttonhole needs to be. Once you have your button, you're just going to mark out your top and tail of that button. And I like to draw a vertical line between these 2 markings. If I was going to just have the top and tail, it would be really, really tight getting this button through. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of extra space on the top and tail. Probably 1/8 of an inch this looks like, maybe a little less. And that just creates ease. Now I'm going to extend my vertical line and I'm going to do 2 markings on either side of the vertical line, very, very close to that center line. Just about as close as humanly possible. These lines are going to act as the guides for my buttonhole stitch, and the center line is going to act as my guide for where I want to open up the seam. And that's what my marking looks like, and I just like to check that my button is absolutely going to fit perfectly there. Now, of course, if you're going to be doing lots of buttonholes, you might like to measure out how far apart these buttonholes are going to be, and you can mark all of the buttonholes you need for your project. But I'm just going to do one for the purpose of demonstration. Before opening up the buttonhole to begin stitching, I want to do some reinforcing stitches along the outline of the buttonhole. Personally, I like to double up my thread when I'm working on a buttonhole so it's nice and strong. Now that I've got my outline, the next step is doing a small running stitch all the way along the perimeters of this marking here. And that's going to act as a nice stabilizing guide for my stitches when I do the buttonhole stitch later on. I have forgotten to do this stitch before and I have noticed the difference greatly. So I highly recommend doing this stabilizing stitch before opening the buttonhole. If you've never done a running stitch before, it's a very simple and strong stitch where basically your thread is coming from the underneath side of your work. You pop your needle in on the right side of that stitch, and then your needle is going to poke out on the left side. And you can see here, there's a little hole right where this stitch is started, and I'm going to put my needle in there, and it's going to go underneath and pop out on the other side of where my thread was. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this very well, but I'll insert a tutorial on how to do a running stitch. That will probably be a little bit more helpful than this. And there you have it, a beautiful outline that's going to help us when we do the buttonhole stitch. And I just like to do a tiny little knot. I'll just catch the underside of the fabric here, stitch through, and do a knot. Just to sort of cast off. Snip, lovely. Now I'm just going to open up the buttonhole, snipping right along this marking and stopping a little bit before my edge stitch on either end. Gorgeous! Now it's at this stage you might want to use some of this phrase stopper. It's not entirely necessary, but I do find that it just makes the next part a little bit easier. I'm just going to wait for my phrase stopper to dry. Also guys, I'm feeling really nervous doing a tutorial. I usually just do like sewing vlog content. So hopefully this is making sense. If you have questions, please let me know. Okay, it's time to do the buttonhole stitch. I'm going to double up my thread, and a really good rule of thumb when you're measuring your thread is to do your arm span to roughly the center of your chest, and I'm gonna double that up. That just means that you're never stitching past the extension length of your arm, because that's kind of exhausting. To double up the thread, I will grab the center point of that thread and create a little loop, just like that. And that loop is going through the eye of the needle. And when the loop comes out, it's hard to see on camera, but the loop is going to come out the other edge of the eye of the needle. I'm just going to bring the tail of the thread through that loop, and I'm going to tighten it. Boop. On the other end of the thread, I will tie a knot. Let's do the stitch. Once again, I'm going to start from the bottom of the work and pull my thread to the right side of the work, and then we can begin. Basically, all of the stitches are going to encase this raw edge. So I'm going to bring my needle around that edge, and it's going to come out just to the other side of where I did my stitch guideline. Just like that. I'm going to poke it through, bring it so that there's only a little bit of a loop, and then I'm going to bring my needle through that loop, creating a small knot. And that knot is ideally going to sit right on the edge of the buttonhole. The trick to making your buttonhole look nice and even is trying to get these little knots sitting side by side at a really even tension and distance apart. So you bring that loop through, bring your needle through the loop, and gently tighten the knot. Hopefully you can see this. So there's the opening. My needle goes underneath to the wrong side of the work and out just on the other edge of my guideline. Tighten up that loop. Slip the needle through, creating the knot, and tighten that knot. And now I'm just going to repeat that over and over and over until I'm at the other end of this line. A reason why it's really important to have the guideline stitch that we did previously is that it makes sure that you're catching both layers of your fabric. When I have forgotten to do that guideline stitch, sometimes when I go to do the buttonhole stitch, I'll turn my work to the wrong side and I'll see that the underside of the fabric didn't even get caught in the buttonhole stitch, which is really, really annoying. So it's highly recommended. And this is one of those stitches where practice makes better. Your first few pancakes are gonna look real sketchy, and you're slowly going to be able to get more and more consistent results. I've been doing this for over a year now, and I still don't feel like I'm at my promised land of beautiful hand-stitched buttonholes. But I love making them, and they're only ever gonna get better, so that's great. Okay, so you can see one side of my buttonhole is completely finished. The fabric is all covered and it's looking lovely and neat from both sides. I'm super happy with that. Now it's time to work on this little end bar right at the edge of the buttonhole. This is really simple. You're basically just going to do a bunch of stitches going backwards and forwards right over that bar, creating a nice strong tack at the end of the buttonhole. And once again, I'm using my marker as a guideline. You don't need to do too many stitches here, just follow your heart. You'll know when it's looking nice and sturdy and when you feel comfortable moving on. I'll probably do about 5 stitches as a rule of thumb. I'm pretty happy with that. So now it's time to repeat all of that stitching process along the other edge of the buttonhole. If your thread is on the other side, just like mine was, you can bring your needle down one more time, and I'm just going to bring my thread up the fabric. There we go, right on the edge of my stitch marker. And then the process begins again. Through that gap, right on the edge of my stitch marker, pull it through, make a little knot, and repeat. Something that I always try and ensure is that I have enough thread to get all the way around the buttonhole. This is kind of just a practice thing. You will start to get an idea of how much thread it takes, but I find that an arm's length is a pretty good rule of thumb. And overall, this stitch is so simple. Once you get the stitch down, you're going to be totally fine, and it's just a matter of practicing the neatness of it. And I would say that it probably takes me about 1 movie or so to get a whole shirt of buttonholes done. It's definitely more time consuming than using a domestic machine, but it isn't too extensive. In fact, I would just say it's quite an enjoyable task. Another reason why I love doing hand-stitched buttonholes is because I really like using mismatched buttons. I have a really big collection of my grandma's vintage buttons, so whenever I make a blouse or something like that, I'll usually pick out several different sized and shaped buttons, and I just find it so much easier to measure out how the buttonholes are going to be when I'm doing it manually. Visually getting to look at the button and make sure that it fits, you know, it's just more consistent. Sometimes you need to let your thread unwind. It gets a little bit crazy. Hey, come back. Also guys, while I have you, I wanted to ask, if you could time travel and go back to when you learned how to sew, what would you tell your younger sewing self? I'm talking about tips and tricks, things that changed your life, things that would have saved you so much heartache. I just want you guys to fill the comment section with every little amazing piece of information that you've learned so we can help out all of the beginner sewists that are watching this video. Just fill that comment section with all of your wisdom, friends. I know you got a lot of it too. Oh my goodness, I finished the other side of my buttonhole. Let me show you how to finish this. All right, so I did my whole other side of buttonhole stitch, and now I just need to repeat that little tack moment, but for the other side. So I'm just bringing my needle on one side of the fabric and bringing it out on the other. Boom. Super easy, and I'll probably do that 4 or 5 times, just like the other side. Once you're finished, bring the needle to the wrong side of the work. This is my wrong side. How gorgeous is that for the wrong side of a project? Beautiful. And my favorite way to finish off stitching is just bringing my needle through only the wrong side of the fabric and just doing a knot. And I might repeat that 2 or 3 times for extra security. Wonderful. And snip. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a huge advocate for pressing your work. I think it just makes everything look better. It's done. There is my beautiful hand-stitched buttonhole. Aww. So that's the wrong side of the work, and you can see just about all of the threads of the material are completely encased. And that's the right side of the buttonhole. It looks so beautiful. As you can see, my stitches aren't completely even. I'm working on it, but more or less, that is lovely. And if you zoom out a bit, it's looking fine. So there you have it, a super simple technique, relatively quick to sew up, and it results in a gorgeous high quality hand-stitched buttonhole. It's perfect to use on garments that you made from scratch, but it's also a wonderful tool to have in your toolbox if you have any garments that you already own that have unraveling buttonholes. You can use this technique, get your needle and thread, do a little buttonhole stitch, and it will mend up just like new. Totally epic. That's how to hand stitch your own buttonhole, and I really hope you guys enjoy this technique as much as I do. And that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. If you liked the video, give it a like, or if you want more sewing content from me, feel free to subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Sending lots of love. Bye.